Good evening, everyone. I'm Peggy O'Neill, the Adult Services Programming Librarian at Penfield Library, and together with my colleague Robin Avery, who is the Programming and Outreach Services Librarian at Pittsford Community Library, we're delighted to have you participating in our special series, Encouraging Nature in Your Own Backyard. Just a little couple of housekeeping procedures. One, we'd like you to all stay muted and also turn off your video. And in addition, we have questions. We would ask you to put your questions in the chat, and we will answer those at the conclusion of the program. And I think, was there anything else, Robin?
I don't think so.
I think that's pretty much it right now. And so with, I'm going to introduce our first presenter, Megan Meyer. And let me just, Megan.
All right.
Megan Meyer is an avid gardener with a background in landscape design and plant propagation. She lectures on several garden-related topics. Her talks weave together her knowledge of gardening, the effects of climate change, and ethical stewardship of our landscapes. She also co-leads Color Penfield Green, which is an environmental advocacy group here in Penfield, New York. And of course, they are co-sponsoring the program with Color Pittsford Green. So Megan, without further ado, I'll let you take it over.
Thank you so much, Peggy. And welcome everybody. I'd like to, hold on, I'm just gonna change my, how I see people and everything. I just wanna thank again, the Penfield and Pittsford Libraries for hosting Encouraging Nature in Your Backyard, and to Color Penfield and Color Pittsford Green for their encouragement and support for this series. We hope to inspire you to rethink your yard, to make it more inviting for yourself, and to increase its potential to support the many species we depend on for a healthy ecosystem that supports us. Color Penfield Green is a newly formed organization of Penfield residents that are concerned about our environment. Their goals are to inform and educate our residents on ways our community can embrace sustainable life practices that focus on mitigating climate change, reversing species and habitat loss, and healing the land at individual, town, state, and federal levels. You can visit their website to learn about and also get involved in some of their sustainable campaigns. And you can also, they have a monthly newsletter that's quite interesting. You can sign up there. And then I'd just like to say that Healthy Yards Penfield is a new campaign just starting as a result of this collaboration. Color Pittsford Green are Pittsford residents who have recently come together with similar goals to inform, encourage, and assist the town and residents to take actions on our climate crisis through local changes. Ideas include reducing the local carbon footprint by converting to renewable electricity, increasing energy efficiency, reducing food waste, adopting community-wide composting, and creating healthy landscapes for humans and wildlife. Mary Moore and I teamed up to bring our two towns together through this nature series. And at this point, I would like to introduce Mary, who will talk about her town of Pittsford's progress towards a healthy environment.
Thank you, Megan. Good evening and welcome. I'm Mary Moore. Special thanks to Robin Avery, our Pittsford librarian, and Penfield librarian Peggy O'Neill for their enthusiastic support for our nature series. Thank you, guys. Megan and I live in different towns, but we share the same goals for Pittsford and Penfield and the people who live there. We promote healthy habitats that provide food and nesting areas for insects and birds. Healthy habitats require the planting of native trees, shrubs, and flowers. and no pesticides. In 2018, I stood before the Pittsford Town Board and requested that the town stop applying pesticides to town properties. In preparing for this request, I discovered that we in New York have some protection from pesticide health hazards. The Child Safe Playing Fields Act of 2010 prohibits the application of pesticides to any playgrounds, turf, athletic fields, or playing fields on school or daycare properties in the state of New York. Governor Cuomo recently signed a law that prohibits the use of the pesticide glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, on all New York State property effective December of this year. Our birds and insects have no policies or laws to protect them from pesticides. Pesticide use is one of the leading causes in the steep decline of birds, bees, butterflies, and other beneficial insects. Let's go back to Pittsford's progress toward a pesticide-free town. With the help of concerned residents, the town established the Toxic Free Challenge program to encourage residents to maintain pesticide-free lawns. Spencer Bernard will explain more about the challenge.
Hi, my name is Spencer Bernard, Chief of Staff for the town of Pittsford. I'm here to talk about one of my favorite sustainability initiatives, the Pittsford Toxic Free Challenge. For decades, the town practice has been to use as little pesticides as possible and to only treat severe or safety issues. In fact, the town maintains 3,100 acres of land using less chemical herbicides and pesticides each year than just two average half-acre yards in Pittsford use with a chemical lawn service. That's what got us to turn our attention to the tidal wave of pesticides being used on private residences. Committing to a toxic-free lawn is where the most change can be made. So working with engaged citizens, we supported a grassroots movement that shows you can have a toxic-free lawn that is healthy, looks great, and is good for people, plants, and animals. Maintaining a toxic-free lawn that is good for the environment and looks good is not too hard. Some simple steps that can make a big impact include: choose the right grass for your yard conditions. Consider replacing some lawn with native trees, shrubs, and flowers. Native plants need very little watering, very little care, and no chemicals. Mow and water correctly, patch bare spots quickly to avoid weeds, and reevaluate your lawn contract to avoid non-organic pesticides and herbicides. You'll find more information and tips on maintaining a good-looking lawn without chemicals on the town website at townofpittsford.org/toxic-free. If you're committed to a toxic-free lawn like I am, you can show your support with one of our Toxic-Free Challenge lawn signs. You can pick one up at the Town Hall front steps or at our community garden at Thornell Farm Park. I hope you'll consider helping us create a greener, healthier, more sustainable community. Every little bit helps. Many thanks to the engaged residents who worked with the town to plan the Toxic Free Challenge and make it a reality. And a special thanks to all of you involved in this discussion. Your efforts will help educate our community and will lead to a more sustainable future for us all.
The town of Pittsford continues to use a limited amount of pesticides. However, significant strides have been made towards zero use. In March 2019, Pittsford hired a pesticide-free contractor to maintain neighborhood districts and other town properties. This decision cut back on the use of Cleanup Pro, a fully loaded glyphosate formulation. New machinery has been purchased to make pesticide elimination more successful: an aerator for compacted soil, an overseeder to fill in bare spots. In conclusion, we continue to lobby the town to adopt a pesticide-free policy in alignment with the Child Safe Playing Fields Act. Thank you.
We have ways to connect for anyone in the towns of Penfield and Pittsford. If you'd like to learn more about Color Penfield and Color Pittsford Green, we'll also put this slide up at the end also. And I believe someone might be putting these connections in the chat for you as well.
Someone did, yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mary and Katie Rigg, who's checking out that chat room. So I'm excited about talking about this. I've been a gardener for most of my life, and just within the last 5 years have learned that how we garden matters. New practices are emerging in the field of landscape and garden design that we can translate into our yards and gardens and make them healthier for us and for the pollinators and the birds that also call our yard home. Systems thinking is a process of understanding how things influence one another within a whole. It is a belief that parts of a system can be best understood in the context of relationships with each other. So what are those relationships or conditions that we need to support a ruby-throated hummingbird in our yards? Well, first off, they prefer tubular nectar plants like this red cardinal flower. They build their nests in large shrubs and trees whose leaves hide their nesting spots. And in spring, they feed their young insects such as mosquitoes, gnats, fruit flies, and spiders. Your yard optimally should have all three to support this enchanting creature. You know, the oxygen we need to breathe is precisely what all green plants around us breathe out. So what the plants breathe out, all of us are breathing in. And then what we breathe out is just what all those plants need to breathe in. This simple yet profound statement by environmental activist and Buddhist scholar Joanna Macy literally stopped me in my tracks. Our lives are intertwined with plants by the very air that we breathe. That life-sustaining breath we breathe in is dependent on plants. The more plants we have around us, the more oxygen there is for us to receive, and the more carbon those plants sequester from our atmosphere. And yet, here's the typical American yard. Now, I know this is not your yard, but many backyards do look like this. The more leaf surface a plant has, as in trees and shrubs, the more oxygen it gives off and the more carbon it sequesters. A garden of perennials will also gift you with more oxygen than a lawn. And flowers produce nectar, an essential food source for our pollinators. But planting more trees, shrubs, and perennials is only part of the answer. The kind of tree, shrub, and perennial you choose matters, and here is why. Harvard biologist, naturalist, and author E.O. Wilson called insects the little things that run the world. Wilson is referred to as the father of biodiversity. 90% of our native insects are host specific. It is not just the monarch butterfly. And that means that they can only eat certain plants. And again, an example of this is the monarch caterpillar, who only feeds on our native milkweed plants. Insects are the dominant form of animal life in our world. They are vital to healthy ecosystems, carrying out numerous functions that make life possible. They pollinate our plants, many of which we rely on for food. They break down organic matter to enrich our soil. They also provide food for other animals, including our birds, frogs, and small mammals. As insects decline, so do the animals that rely on them for food. Our native insects have co-evolved with the native plants they depend on. In our neck of the woods, this means native plants that historically grew on the land here, not plants that originated in California or New Mexico, which are also labeled native. Insect populations have declined 45% globally over the last 4 decades. Presently, 432 species, or 1/3 of North American birds, are at risk of extinction, and 46 species have lost half of their population. And this is because of habitat loss, reduced food sources, and pesticides. So what is a new garden ethic? Aldo Leopold stated in his land ethic essay from the book Asan County Almanac, it is a call for moral responsibility to the natural world. At its core, a land ethic is simply caring about people, about land, and about strengthening the relationships between the two. In a time of climate change and mass extinction, who we garden for matters more than ever. If we translate Leopold's land ethic to our properties and gardens, how might this look? By thinking deeply and honestly about our built landscapes, we can create a compassionate activism that connects us more profoundly to nature and to one another. We humans have taken 95% of the natural world and made it unnatural. The consequences of using almost all of our land to meet human needs without considering the needs of other species is loss of biodiversity. In his latest book, Half Earth, E.O. Wilson states that emergency measures are required to stabilize our biodiversity. We must set aside half of planet Earth as a human-free natural reserve to preserve our biodiversity. Yet the data shows that we have already colonized way more than half with urban, suburban sprawl, shopping malls, factory farms, and parking lots. Scientist Doug Tallamy states that our natural preserved lands in the United States, which include state and national parks today, is not enough. We must look to how we garden in our yards to preserve the biodiversity we need to sustain our planet for future generations. Doug Tallamy is professor of entomology at the University of Delaware, and he has given us a roadmap in his new book, Nature's Best Hope. And yes, he's an insect geek. He studies insects and what they need to survive.
The ability for ecosystems to function in our managed landscapes in our suburban-urban matrix is very poor because we have landscape primarily for looks. We've treated plants as if they were decorations and forgotten all about their ecological roles. So we've sacrificed the ability of all of the land that we've used for our suburban neighborhoods to make ecosystem services that not only support other creatures, but they support us as well. And that's one of the reasons that we're doing the research we're doing. We're trying to generate enough data to convince people that these landscapes can be highly productive. If you produce plants that insects cannot reproduce on and develop on, you are creating a really depauperate ecosystem. What this homeowner has done is put the plants back into this suburban landscape. Most of these plants are indigenous. They are native to this area, which means they are important components of the food webs that originally were in this area. So you have lots of wildlife around, and these plants are filtering our water, they are sequestering carbon, they're supporting food webs, they are supporting the pollinators that keep those plants around, they're producing oxygen. All of the ecosystem services that plants provide are now happening right in this yard because it's not one vast lawn. When I think of best plants, I think of what those plants are doing, and in almost every instance, oaks come out on top. In our region of the country, the mid-Atlantic states, oaks support 534 species of caterpillars. And remember, the birds are eating those caterpillars. So that's 534 species of bird food coming from the oak in your front yard. There's no other tree that does it better. Just for comparison's sake, if you had a ginkgo in your yard, which is from Asia, it supports 1 species of caterpillar. So there's a huge difference in the productivity of these particular trees. I care about this because we need these other living things to run the ecosystems that we depend on as humans. So we can think of this as, we're not making a sacrifice here. We are doing what's absolutely necessary to keep the ecosystems running that support us. So it's for humans.
Wow. Talmy also goes on to say in his book, Bringing Nature Home, that in order to feed 1 clutch of chickadees, the parents have to round up 4,800 caterpillars. Wow. 96% of birds feed their young insects and caterpillars in spring. Native plants are the host plants for our native insects, which support these native birds. Fewer native plants mean fewer insects, and with fewer insects as a food source, we have fewer birds. Using baby steps, we can start to introduce native plantings into our yards to help our native pollinators. This can be in the form of a small pollinator garden or introducing native shrubs and trees as a border on the sides or back of your property. A hedgerow of sorts that frames and defines your yard, gives you privacy, and offers our birds and insects a home as well. When I first started my gardens in Penfield 25 years ago, which pretty much looked like the typical suburban backyard, I added a shrub border to one side of my property as a background layer that eventually stepped down to a garden of perennials. Each summer, I would add more plantings as I reduced my lawn. Taking on one small area and then building on your knowledge from year to year is doable. Plants like us are social creatures. Our garden plants evolved as members of diverse social networks. This butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, in the wild coexists with grasses and other perennials in a meadow setting, and the flowers are found at exactly the right height for pollinators to find. And it has a taproot that can compete with the fibrous roots of the grasses. Many gardeners place plants as specimens surrounded by mulch and fail to translate in their gardens what plants need. Our current habit of tidying up the garden before winter does not take into consideration how our native bees and other pollinators winter over. When we do this, we reduce those caterpillars and insects our birds depend on to feed their young in the spring. A new breed of garden designers and garden curators are embracing many of these concepts and have changed the way they design and take care of gardens. As Talmy says, native plants are the cornerstone of the Earth's ecosystems and the base of the food chain that leads to our dinner table. They evolved in and defined particular locations where they provide food and shelter for native insects, birds, and other animals. And together, native plants and animals form a web of mutually beneficial interactions that is greater than the sum of its parts, an ecosystem. Restoring native plant habitat is vital to preserving biodiversity. By creating a native plant garden, each patch of habitat becomes part of a collective effort to nurture and sustain our living landscape. As we translate Leopold's land ethic to our yards and gardens, we can say a garden ethic sees the built landscape as a community of like-minded creatures dependent on one another. It also builds on empathy, seeing life through another's eyes, and rethinks what pretty is. A beautiful garden welcomes us, consoles, heals, and teaches us. And a beautiful garden does this through providing the same services for birds, bees, moths, soil microbes, and more. So what can we do as gardeners? Look to nature and start by working with plant communities. Get rid of the mulch and use plants as living ground covers. In this designed woodland garden, you find a plant community of natives and non-natives, but the important thing to observe here is that there are no standalone plants surrounded by mulch. It is a diverse plant population that has knit itself together to support and evoke the feeling of a wild woodland floor. And when you knit these plants together, there's less weeding involved. Understanding how nature works is knowledge that has started to gain popularity with many influential garden designers and horticulturists. For the past 40 years, Pennsylvania-based ecologist and plantsman Rick Darke and author has studied and photographed North American plants in diverse habitats, creating plant layers with small native trees, shrubs, and perennials capture and hold more carbon than lawn. Darke and his wife, Melinda, garden on about 1.5 acres in Landenberg, Pennsylvania. The gardens are thoroughly sustainable. It is herbicide and pesticide free. Darke and Zora don't rely on others for services, and they do everything themselves. It's full of many natives, but not exclusively native, and no part of this garden is irrigated. If you have not visited the High Line in New York City, this is definitely a destination habitat garden in the middle of an urban environment. This garden is a great example of this new way of gardening that some refer to as the new perennial movement. The High Line is a public park built on an historic freight rail line that is elevated above the streets on Manhattan's West Side. Saved from demolition by neighborhood residents and the city of New York, the High Line opened in 2009 as a hybrid public space where visitors experience nature, art, and design. The High Line evokes a sense of place with the many native plants that anchor the different mini ecosystems. Pierre Udolph is responsible for designing this space. He has emerged as the leading contributor of this new philosophy of gardening. He places perennials center stage and demonstrates how plants can work in an ecological way by working with plant communities. The almost 1.5 miles of garden in the High Line take you through plant communities that evoke feelings of natural woodlands, meadow, and prairie, but they're not your traditionally cultivated garden. They are composed and curated landscapes that evoke a site's ecological past, celebrate the best attributes of plant life, and invite visitors to slow down and take it all in. Typically, the High Line is cut down early spring, which allows hibernating pollinators to winter over in the hollow stems and leaf litter. This is an ecological approach to gardening. Most botanical gardens boast of curating plants from around the world. They are an outdoor museum of plants for study. Native plantings typically have taken a back seat in these gardens to their more exotic cousins. But I do see a growing trend in the botanical gardens I have visited over the past 5 years. They're beginning to elevate the status of our native plants in newly designed plant communities on their grounds. This native meadow garden is 3.5 acres within the New York Botanical Garden grounds, and it celebrates the beauty of plants native to northeastern North America. Nearly 100,000 native trees, shrubs, and wildflowers were planted using a contemporary design that harmonizes with the natural landscape. Mount Cuba Center is a botanical garden located near Wilmington, Delaware, in the gently rolling hills of the Delaware Piedmont. In 2020, it was selected as the best botanical garden in North America in USA Today's 10 Best Reader's Choice Awards. This public garden is dedicated exclusively to native plants and ecological gardening. Mount Cuba Center has preserved over 500 acres of natural lands in Delaware, which include woodland settings, restored meadows, and beautiful formal gardens around the house, whose plants are all native to this area. The former owners of this land were visionary in their approach to conservation and in their vision for Mount Cuba Center. We want this to be a place where people will learn to appreciate our native plants and to see how these plants can enrich their lives so that they in turn will become conservators of our natural habitats. Mount Cuba Center trials native plants for the nursery trade to determine which ones have superior performance in the garden and publish these findings for the public. If we start to plant with the understanding that plants in community with one another rather than individual objects in our gardens, they'll be more resilient and resistant to change. Landscape architect and author Thomas Rainier, who wrote the book Planting in a Post-Wild World, is one of the leading voices in ecological landscape design. And this is his front garden in Arlington, Virginia. And his blog, Grounded Design, are all about planting solutions that are resilient, ecologically functional, and beautiful. The goal in small space gardens is to create the feeling of depth and expansiveness. And one way you can do this is by creating the appearance of layers by using repetition, contrasting textures and colors in your plant combinations. Adam Woodruff, a young, talented landscape designer, previously based in Missouri, has recently moved to Massachusetts, is one of many that have embraced this new way of gardening that evokes a sense of place. In this garden, his inspiration comes from the wild Midwest prairies. Nature doesn't have to be mean messy. You can frame the garden with a neat lawn border, a clipped hedge, a fence, or hardscaping. And here, Adam's stylized dry meadow is framed by low walls. Tony Spencer lives in Ontario, Canada, north of Toronto. His gardens are great examples of this new style of planting, and just this year, he won the 2020 Honor Award in Landscape Design from the United States Perennial Plant Association for his pond garden. And this is just one image of that. And Tony actually will be giving a Zoom lecture for the Greater Rochester Perennial Society in April for members. And you can go to their website to learn more. For those of you with trees and lots of shade like I do, the natives planted here are more subtle and quiet, but just as essential in rethinking our yards. This is a natural woodland setting. The spring ephemerals, which include trillium, woodland phlox, shown here, can be complemented with fern and native sedges when the trees leaf out. Many of our pollinators that use trees as host plants, such as the oak, drop to the ground in fall and survive in the plantings and leaf litter, and some actually burrow underground to emerge in the spring. A clipped lawn around trees is not conducive for this natural process. And here's another nice example of a designed native plant shade matrix where plants knit together to form a weed-free tapestry of different textures and variations on green. This pathway at the Coastal Maine Botanical Gardens that I visited several years back is planted with native sedges and fern, along with small trees and shrubs as their middle layer. The sedge is used as a living mulch. Sedges are similar in appearance to grass, but many of them are more tolerant of shade and don't need to be cut as often as grass. As we transform our gardens and plant more trees and shrubs for shade in a warming world, we may want to try some of these lesser known plants as we move forward in reducing our lawns. This lawn is a monoculture of non-native grasses that is maintained with synthetic herbicides and fertilizers. It has to be mowed weekly with gas-powered equipment, unless you've transferred your equipment to electric powered. And also, they need to be watered weekly in dry spells to keep it looking good. Our traditional landscapers typically landscape using non-native shrubs and trees as well. Aside from this property not being a healthy environment for us and our children and pets, this lawn has no ecological value for supporting our pollinators or birds, and yet this is what many homeowners aspire to. Over 90% of all Americans, including pregnant women, have pesticide residues in their bodies. Studies show that while we are being exposed less to some now banned pesticides, other pesticide levels such as glyphosate are rapidly increasing in our bodies. Health problems such as cancers, endocrine disruption, reproductive problems, effects on mental development and behavior, and even effects on semen quality are linked to these toxic chemicals. The American Academy of Pediatrics issued a statement in December of 2012 warning of the dangers of pesticide exposure, including in the home, to children and during pregnancy. They stated that this includes common pesticides considered by many as safe, such as pyrethroids. And our pets are at risk too. Dogs exposed to lawn pesticides develop the same cancers as humans. Researchers consider them early warning systems for human health because cancers take only a few years to show up in dogs, but many years in humans. So we need to rethink our lawns. I grew up in the early 60s with a lawn that had lots of different plants growing through it, and it was mowed once every week to keep it neat. When I returned home from college in the 70s, my dad had started to use chemicals to kill off what he then perceived as weeds. They lost 2 dogs to cancer once they started using pesticides. And this actually is a close-up of my front lawn. I have many plants that weave together to make up my reduced lawn, which include native violet, clover, and dandelions, and a host of others that form a diverse lawn community. The weeds we're killing in our lawns are the life supports to many of our local native insects. Our common native violet is a host plant to 31 species of butterflies and moths, including the great spangled fritillary. The other fact about pesticides is that they don't stay in place, but can be tracked into the house, and the runoff of these chemicals are also found in our groundwater and water supply. Even our common dandelion, which is native to Europe, is a caterpillar host plant to 13 species of butterflies and moths in upstate New York, including the giant spotted leopard moth. Wouldn't that be cool to see? You can get creative by adding taller pollinator plants among the grass, like this front lawn at Chanticleer Botanical Gardens in Pennsylvania. The neatly clipped green border acts as a frame and lets people know that this is intentional and well tended. If you absolutely want that traditional lawn, go with organic lawn care products for maintaining it. As stewards of our own small piece of the earth, and in light of habitat loss, depleting natural resources, and the health of the planet, there are ways that we can adapt our yards and gardens that will enhance and help our environment for future generations and still be beautiful. Sustainability is to meet present needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. One wonders how any one of us can individually have an impact on the global water shortage, climate change, and loss of biodiversity. But if you look at the statistics, it becomes clear that our yards and gardens, as well as our town land, have an essential role to play. Let us rethink our gardens and lawns so that they support our declining insect and bird populations and create a healthier environment for ourselves. And at this point, I'm going to encourage you to try at least one new idea you have learned tonight in your yards and gardens. So in review, reduce your lawn by planting more native trees and shrubs. Protect children, pets, and our groundwaters by eliminating synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. Use native perennials to support our native pollinators. Leave gardens standing over winter and leaf litter in gardens for our native pollinators. Learn to compost for free nutrients for your garden. And rethink your lawn. Doug Tallamy has introduced a new collaborative conservation project called Homegrown National Park. It is a call to action, and its purpose is to create an urban-suburban beltway for pollinators by planting native plants in our yards. Mary and I envision you as part of our own local homegrown national park, and we are here to help get you started and on the map for a sustainable future for all. Cultural historian Thomas Berry's words are a call to action. The great work of our time is to carry out the transition from this current period where humans are a tremendously destructive presence on this earth to one in which the human presence is beneficial to the planet and the entire community of life. If you are interested in joining us on our journey of learning and acting in community on what we can do to create healthy yards and contribute to Homegrown National Park on a local level, shoot Mary or I an email about your interest. Our idea is to work collaboratively together to share information, learn from one another, celebrate in community, and to grow your own homegrown national park in our communities and get on Tuolumne's map. I thank you so much. And I'll just put up this last slide. And again, Mary and I thank Color Penfield and Color Pittsford Green for their support. And if there are questions, I'd be very happy to answer them.
Okay.